How to do a double closing for your wholesale deals. Guys, my name is Rick Ginn with Flip with Rick, and in this video, I'm going to go into depth on what a double closing is and when you need to use it. But listen, before we get started, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button to hear more free content just like this. So you've heard it before, double closing. What is it? Is it like double vision? What's the name? It just seems to be this like secret pathway, like this dirty little secret in the business. And to be honest with you, if you do wholesaling long enough, eventually you will have to execute a double closing. So quickly, what is a double closing? It's simply what it says. The word double represents two closings within a short amount of time frame, usually within 24 hours, aka also known as a simultaneous close. A simultaneous close and a double closing are actually the exact same thing. People use them interchangeably. It just depends on who you speak to, who taught you this business, and the lingo you learned. So understanding that they're the exact same thing will help clarify these issues. So let's walk through, now that we know what a double closing is, let's walk through the mechanics and how it works. And then we'll explain why you would use this techniques and the pros and cons against it. So number one is you're going to have two closings. So what I'm going to use, if you guys have heard the terminology from A to B and B to C, real quickly, A is basically your seller. That's the person you marketed to, and you're most likely, hopefully, is a motivated seller. That's your A. Your B is you, the wholesaler. Okay. And then your B again is you, the wholesaler, and C is going to be the end buyer, whatever it is, a rehabber, cash buyer, most likely. And that's how it works. So what are the structures of a double closing? So it's basically going to be two closings within a short time frame. And what happens is you're buying the property from your seller. I know what you're probably saying. Well, like, Rick, I got in the wholesaling, so I didn't have to put cash in the deal. I will tell you the fundamental element of double closing is it has to be funded. So there's no way around this. Don't try to cheat it. It doesn't work. If you try any technique outside of this, trying to do an A to B and a B to C without clear division, you're most likely at risk of violating some sort of HUD law, some sort of violation for state regulations, or definitely a federal regulation. A to B, that deals its own closing. That's closing number one. And then just pretend you walked into another room and you did the B to C. In the A to B room is your seller and you sign the documents, it gets funded. Then you walk across the hallway. It's you and the end buyer, which is going to be your cash buyer. And they bring their money to the table and you sell them the property. Rick, how do I fund these types of deals? In most instances, you can set up a temporary funding source. Most likely what you'll do is either a private funding source for a very, very, very short-term period. And I used to do this when I first started wholesaling. And it's not as tough as you think it is. If you have a buyer lined up, say if I have a property under contract, say $50,000, and I have an end buyer for $80,000, and I'm going to do a double closing, basically the person only has to fund $50,000. They don't have to fund the $80,000, just $50,000. And remember, you already have all the documents secured to sell the property to the end user. You're only going to use the money basically, in essence, an hour. Like, you're going to rent the money for an hour to have that clear division from A to B and B to C. What I would do is I would offer a private investor, somebody I knew that had money, and I'd offer anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 or $3,000 to get the deal done. Now, if you have this set up in advance, it's a killer strategy and it works really well. Now, if you do not have a private source of funds, which is the best way to do it because it's clean, it's easy, and who doesn't want to make a couple $1,000s on moving money just for an hour with little to absolutely no risk? Because the key to a double closing is most people that fund it, which is going to be a private investor or some sort of transactional funder, is It will only fund once the end buyer's money's in place. So there's virtually little to no risk for them to do it. There's always a slight bit of risk, but usually the title company will spell it out that if the end buyer, which is your C buyer, is not ready to go, they don't have their money in escrow, they won't fund the A to B. So it's very protected. Now, once again, if you don't have that private source, you can use what's called transactional funding. And typically, they're going to charge a 2 to 3% fee on whatever they fund. So if you're doing $50,000, they'll charge 3%. 1,500, but just keep in mind there is a lot of paperwork and you have to give them a heads up, usually 7 to 10 days in advance. If you've done business with them in the past, it's usually much, much easier. So don't panic if you don't have private funds. You can look up a transactional funder in your area. They do it nationally too. There is a lot of underwriting. It's a little bit about a bank because they need to see all the contracts. They need to see all the paperwork, and a lot of times they want to communicate sometimes between your seller, but they're more interested in your end buyer to make sure that deal's like legit. So they're going to make sure that they have money in escrow and they're ready to go and they're locked and loaded. So you can go that route. Either way works. So you have the A to B, that's its own closing, and then the B to C, and it works. So the big question is, what is the purpose of a double closing? Why do we do it? Why don't I just assign everything? I'll be the first to tell you, too many people are so like freaked out with assignments. It's like people are cracking down on it. It's illegal. Here's the reality of why people do double closing specifically for wholesaling is sometimes you have a seller that is very... It's never, in my opinion, I've never had an issue with the seller having an issue with an assignment. Typically, it winds up being your end buyer. For some reason, some end buyers are so obsessed with what you paid for the property, they will get in their own way to buy a good deal. Now, it's none of my business, but if I have someone that'll pay me 30 grand more and I can put it in my pocket, the stipulation is they don't want to see the spread I make on an assignment. And if I had to sign it, I'd only make 10 or 15,000 and this guy would be 30,000, but I know he's going to have a meltdown when he sees what I bought it for. I'm going to do a double closing just to ensure the deal goes through. Now, here's the drawback of a double closing. You have two closings. So what does that mean? It means you have twice the cost. As you guys know, closing costs usually represent about 1.25%, maybe 1.5%. I've seen some states as high as 2%. In Florida, it's typically like 1.25%, maybe 1.5%, depending on the title company you use. Now, the problem is on a typical deal, if I had to pay $2,000 closing cost, now it turns into $4,000. I'm not a big fan of that. To be honest with you, if you can do an assignment and everybody's comfortable with it and your seller's okay with it and your end buyer is, by all means, do it. A lot of people on a large transaction will like to do a double closing to make sure there is absolutely no hiccups. And it's not really a bad strategy, but there's nothing wrong with doing an assignment. So just don't do it because somebody tells you to do a double closing. If you're transparent, the seller knows what you're doing, the buyer knows what you're doing, by all means, do an assignment. If you think there's going to be a glitch and you have a large profit margin, decide what your threshold of risk is. And so like a lot of companies go anything over $25,000, we're just going to do a double close to make sure it goes seamless and smooth. Either way you do it, it works. At some point, you will cross someone that literally freaks out what you bought it for and they get really nervous. And if you do a double closing, you know in the long run, they're going to find out what you bought it for. So you're not really hiding anything, but you do assure a smooth sailing. So I'm all about disclosures and being honest with people. But sometimes I get it. If the end buyer is a pain in the butt and they're like obsessed with what you bought it for, then don't tell them just do that contract, but you have to do a double closing. That's it. So things you need to consider when doing the double closing. So we already talked about the double costs. So things that you can control in a double closing to minimize some of the costs. The first thing is make sure you have an excellent relationship with your title company. That goes without saying. Think about it. You're buying a property here and 5 minutes, theoretically, you're selling it again or within the hour. So when you go to resell, most of these properties need some sort of title insurance. Ask your title company for what they call a reissue for title credit. What that means is it's basically an insurance policy you just bought twice, sometimes within an hour of each other. And they just insure that title for that extra. I mean, it's not even a day. I don't even think you can backdate it a day, but you're entitled to between a 50 and 60% discount on that title insurance. Make sure you get it. Number two, when you resell your contract, since they're getting two closings, and it's a wonderful business for them. By the way, most title companies love double closings because it's double the money for them, is negotiate your settlement fee. So if you paid $500 for the first one, a lot of times you can get the second one, like hopefully my title company is not watching, you can get a 50% discount on that title fee. So it's $500 on the A to B when you bought it from your seller. And the B to C, a lot of times you can get as low as $200, $250, like a 50% discount. You should expect a discount. You are buying in bulk at this point, and you need to kindly ask it from your title company. And if they don't want to give you a discount on it, shop around for title companies that are okay with doing it. By the way, you can go from one title company to the next one. You'd be shocked in how they treat you as far as a double closing. You need to have that conversation up front with them before you get to the closing table. It's too late negotiating at the table because they kind of got you. Want the discount on the title policy, the reissue credit, 50 to 60%, and the settlement fee. If I'm taking the same property, selling it for cash, there's none of that mortgage BS that comes with it. It should be a simple fee to do it. And it's very fast. It's a lot less paperwork, and it's very easy for the title company. I try to ask for a 50% discount on the resale unless you're getting like ridiculous fee. If you're already getting a settlement for $200 or $300, you can't expect them to do it for $100 because they got office cost, overhead, and everything else on it. So look for as many fees, and then take your HUDs and compare them to each other and make sure they align. Proration of tax, guys, we're talking 5 minutes to an hour. The only difference, I think they have to calculate one day, and that's it. So there should be, the only additional cost is going to be the recording fees for your county. We call it doc stamps in the state of Florida, but every state has something. Don't ask for a discount because they can't. The fees are what the fees are. Unfortunately, that's the headache with double closings. Make sure it's worth it to do a double closing and you have a reason for doing it. The only time I advise doing double closings is maybe it's a big giant fee and you want to ensure it goes smooth. Consider the double closing an insurance policy. Or if your end buyer is squeamish, kind of a pain in the butt, and they're overly concerned what you're buying it for, then by all means do a double closing. Remember, all double closings have to take place at a title company, and they all have to be funded by cash. There's very few banks in the world that are going to allow for a double closing. Don't ask for it. It won't happen. Make sure your C buyer, which is your final cash buyer, is a legitimate cash buyer. Tell me what you think. Do you do double closings? Do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. If you like this content, hit that like button and tell me your opinion about double closings. Do you do them? Do you like to do assignments? I've kind of shared how we do it, and I want you to take this information and go out and get deals done. Guys, this is Flip with Rick, and I appreciate talking to you. See you soon.